Our guest today is truly a light. Please help me welcome Charles Eisenstein to the show. So we're so excited to have you here, and we have so much that we want to cover with you, but your essay, Coronation, went pretty much immediately viral. And for our listeners who haven't read it, can you give us an overview of that and maybe why you think it went viral?
Yeah, I mean, it was a long essay.
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised it went viral because usually 9,000 word essays don't go viral. You're
Yeah.
supposed to write 800 words or less for virality. But what people told me is that it gave voice to things that they had been thinking and not able to put into words, gave voice to some of not only the doubts around the official narrative, but also to the doubts about the doubts. Like, you know, I wasn't coming and saying, okay, everything you're being told is wrong and here's what's right. I was more saying everything we're being told is suspect and I have no idea what's right. And some of these alternative narratives, I don't know if they're right either. And the facts from which we build our narratives, even those are suspect. So I gave voice to this bewilderment. And also I wrote about some of the trends that the COVID-19 crisis has kind of crystallized, but that are of long standing. So, for example, social distancing is actually not new. We have been becoming more and more distant and less engaged in community and in physical presence, embodied presence with each other for decades. Education moving online, socializing moving online, many kinds of human interaction moving online. So this kind of crystallized a long-standing trend. And we could also talk about the trend toward the tracking and surveillance of all citizens at all times. That's not new either. Even things like the destruction of small business that is a consequence of lockdown, that's not new.
Yeah.
So, and I guess what else did I talk about in there? I talked about the paradigm of control that is the default response of the authority structures of our society facing anything troubling. The response is to find something that you can control, something that you can lock up, keep out, isolate, or kill, whether it is a terrorist or a criminal or an invasive species or immigrants or bad people or a virus or a bacteria, something that and so that in a way the COVID-19 has given us, in a way it's provided a relief. It's almost a sense of relief that finally here's a crisis where there is a bad thing that we can control. Unlike the real pandemics of our time, which are, I would say, primarily autoimmunity. I was just talking with Dr. Zach Bush.
You were going to say that.
Yeah. And he was pointing out, he's like, and he was talking about the decline of health and environmental stressors. And he was like, and we wonder why the prevalence of childhood chronic conditions has risen from 1.2% in 1980 to 52% today. And these are autoimmune diseases, psychological disorders, depression and anxiety and allergies.
And I think he talks about how that's mostly from glyphosate and maybe vaccines too.
Glyphosate, pollution, toxic waste, like all kinds of things, electromagnetic pollution. And I thought, I wish that we wondered about that. He prefaced it by saying, and we wonder why, as a figure of speech. And I was like, I wish we wondered more about that and didn't just take it for granted. But anyway, I think that, I wrote about this a bit in the essay, that we have this latent anxiety and perception that there's really something wrong in the world, but we can't really pin it on anything. We don't even recognize, most people don't recognize that there is an epidemic of autoimmunity and depression and obesity and allergies and, these chronic conditions. So COVID comes along and it provides a vehicle to express our latent anxieties. Here's something to be afraid of, and you can do something about it. It's kind of like the same catharsis that a horror movie provides some people. Like we have all these unconscious fears, and it offers something to dress those fears in. It's like an avatar of our fears. And then it provides a satisfying resolution when the bad thing is overcome. Yeah. And so COVID is kind of like that. Like it alleviates the feeling of powerlessness because here's something that we can do about it. The government knows what to do about it. People know what to do about it. Like we have the illusion of control. So anyway, I said, there's all kinds of other things I said in that essay. And I think that it was popular because it filled a bit of a vacuum of sense making. Like, how do you make sense of what's happening? And it also spoke to the bewilderment, as I said before.
Yeah, I think that as you're talking about this, you're talking about the virility of your essay and the virility of a virus, which I mean, where we get that term, but COVID specifically becoming such a viral sensation in its own right, if we want to talk about how popular it is on media, that both things, your essay and COVID, have created this really eloquent, if you want to call it that when we're talking about COVID, I'm not sure, but really concise way for us as humans to be able to envision exactly what's happening in our world and inside us. Of course, your words is the way that we're used to seeing it. And so we saw it in your essay of how you put together what's happening for us in a way that we could understand. And then, from my own binary human mind, it's like, okay, then I can process that and hopefully resolve some parts or, heal some parts, or my mind goes to wanting to fix things. When it comes to the virus, it's like, this is presenting us with an opportunity if we decide to look at it that way. And if we can look at it that way, it's a blessing in a strange ass backwards anyway. But I think just for me, it's like hearing what you just said there speaks so much to how humans want to perceive stuff. Like we want it to be put in front of us in a way, or be able to see it in a way that makes us go, yeah, because that epiphany is like what brings us to the table to consume the media, to regurgitate the media, to be the answer if we can, and all these different aspects, I think, of what make us human.
Yeah. I think a lot of the media right now is keying into our desire to be good and right. So it offers fuel for the outrage machine and the indignation machine that says your side is right, their side is wrong. Aren't they awful? And let's rally the troops. So it offers an identity for people living in a society that has stripped us of a lot of our identity and left us not knowing who we are. And that's because of a very deep condition of breakdown of community and disconnection from nature and all of the other relationships that contributed to a full human self.
Yeah.
So this is, a symptom of a very, very deep condition.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what you call interbeingness, how we can maybe strive to regain a sense of interbeingness, and really what that is.
So it gets really kind of philosophical, if that's okay.
We love that.
All right. So the modern conception of a self is one of the underpinnings of our civilization. It's part of our basic mythology. And by a mythology, I mean the stories that tell us who we are and why we're here and what the world is and what's real and what's possible and what's important. That's a mythology. And so ours says who we are is a separate individual in a world of other, among other competing individuals and competing organisms, and that the world outside of ourselves is basically this fantastically complicated machine, but it is not a sentient, conscious, intelligent being. It is merely the habitation of sentient, conscious, intelligent beings, the pinnacle of which, the only full beings, are ourselves. So animals have a bit less beingness, and plants even less, and rivers, rocks, mountains, the sun, the moon, the stars, the wind, the clouds, none at all. That's the mythology that most of us have grown up in if we've been educated in modern society. Indigenous people, of course, didn't believe anything of the sort. So that's the story of separation, I call it. And it stands in contrast to what I like to call the new and ancient story of interbeing, which is a term coined, I believe, by Thich Nhat Hanh. But it's a very naturally occurring word. I and probably many people started using it simply because what we're talking about, this successor to the separate self, it goes beyond interdependency or interconnection. It's really interexistence. It's not that I depend on you and on our relationships for my survival, or I depend on the Amazon, or I depend on the pollinators or the sun, but it's that these beings are actually part of myself, which means that if we cut down the Amazon or destroy the honeybees or extinguish any species on Earth, even if we could come up with a technological substitute for it and manage and control this planet with geoengineering, carbon-sucking machines, and bleaching the sky white and seeding the oceans to draw down carbon and so on, something in us would still have died without the Amazon. We will have become less. And therefore, our healing as individuals and as a society and as a civilization, it depends on recovering these dwindling aspects of our being, these lost relationships, to come back into relationship with, on every level, with exiled parts of ourselves, with marginalized elements of our society, with other cultures, with the places around us, to come back into community, to come back into the larger ecological community, relations with nature, to know ourselves as relational beings. That's what healing is. And that is what I would like our next mythology to be.
Yeah.
One thing I said in the coronation is that that's not a guarantee. It's not like this disease comes and delivers us from our purgatory of separation. But I was like, at least it's showing us in stark detail where we've been going to the totalitarian biosecurity dystopia, where you never again go to a festival or a wedding or have a group hug or a yoga class or carnival or any of these age-old ways of human interaction without your personal protective bubble. Like that is, and this touches on another dimension of the essay, which is, and it's related to the story of separation, which is the program of control and the equation of progress with control. Because if you are separate from the world outside of you, then the forces of nature and the workings of the world, they have no intelligence, no consciousness, no purpose. They're just a bunch of random noise. And human destiny and human progress then becomes to impose our intelligence onto a world that has none and to overcome the competing others out in the world. That's what progress is. More and more control, domination of the world, of the other, civilizing the barbarians, conquering the beasts, draining the wetlands. All of these are different versions of the program of control that equates to progress. So in that ideology, everything we're seeing happen as a response to COVID-19 totally makes sense. You don't have to posit a evil conspiracy seeking for their nefarious ends, a totalitarian police state. It occurs naturally to somebody who's imbued with this ideology that, of course, we're going to make things better. That's progress. We're going to track everybody at all times, contact tracing, and then we'll be able to control this infection. And this is another thing, part of that essay. As I said, it was really long. That another part of this essay, the program of control, contact tracing. Yeah, it can come as a conspiracy of good intentions. I called it the civilizational tilt toward control. And in fact, to jump off that understanding, see, that's an uncomfortable understanding, because at least a conspiracy theory tells you what to do about it. Like you show them up, you kick them out, you win a war against these bad guys, and then the problem is solved.
Right.
But if the bad guys don't exist at all, or if they exist but they are part of a system and are generated and necessitated by a system, then ousting the bad guys doesn't do anything, because the system will produce new bad guys. And so then we're left with, I don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. That is good. That's what we need. We need to acknowledge that we don't know what to do, that we are not in control, and that the program of control has reached its glass ceiling. For the last 40 or 50 years, it has not made the world a better place. We have not engineered our social problems, crime, poverty, racism out of existence. We have not conquered disease. We have not conquered hunger. We have not won the war on cancer. In fact, quite the opposite. Not only are we ruining the biosphere, but we're not even healthier than we were a generation ago. As Zach Bush's statistic demonstrates, we're not healthier. We're not happier. Rates of depression, rates of suicide are going up. And it's not even that the 1% are doing fine. It's not working for the 1% either. So this is part of why I called it the coronation, in that it maybe can show us, like, here's where we've been going, and here, and showing us our helplessness, and showing us maybe that our efforts to control even create more problems than they solve. And that also shows us our helplessness, and then saying, is this the future that you really want? So
do you think that some people are wanting that future because they're so scared of this virus? They're being pumped with fear to where they are going to want to sit in that outline circle at the park and wear a mask for the rest of their lives, because that's how much fear they're having right now?
Yeah. That was another piece of the essay, actually, that I forgot about, is tracing this to the fear of death and the elevation of risk minimization to holy status. And I said, okay, why? Why are we so afraid of death? Yeah. That's also part of the ideology of the separate self. Death is the ultimate catastrophe, the annihilation of your consciousness forever. And if you accept that, then of course you're going to fight a war on death and see death as the worst possible medical outcome and gear an entire system onto saving lives. But even that, actually, we're not actually saving lives. If you are making policy and making that judgment based purely on epidemiological statistics, then you might say, yeah, lockdown, quarantine, distancing, masks, they saved X number of lives. Even that's quite debatable, actually. There are experts who say that this was the wrong response. But at least there's a debate to be had there. But what do those statistics leave out? On the one hand, they leave out the quality of life that is invisible to longevity statistics. And do you live your life that way? Do you avoid every possible risk? Never get in a car, never get on an airplane, never do anything at all risky? I mean, most people understand that if you live to merely maximize your chances of surviving long, you're not really living. You're not engaging life. But even purely, in terms of deaths caused, probably there are going to be way many people dying of starvation than would have died of COVID.
Of course, yeah.
There's tens of millions right now of children who are wasting. You can look at the videos; they're heartrending. Yeah.
Do you think that with the spike, this recent spike, and everyone's really freaking out now, do you think that recent spike happened because we were doing the quarantine and the mask and the social distancing, and that weakened the immune system, or how?
I was just this morning looking at, basically I spent the morning getting very confused. There are those out there. I saw a graph about the spike in cases in Florida, accompanied by a graph of the number of deaths. The cases are rising and rising rapidly, and the number of deaths is plummeting. So why is that? Is it because the virus is becoming less virulent, less deadly? Is it because it is now infecting younger people who have been, released from lockdown and have infected each other, but they're not as susceptible to really getting sick? Is it because there's a lot more testing now? So a lot more cases have been reported, but they're not actually more cases. It's just an artifact of more testing.
And more antibodies.
Yeah, I don't know. But so I spent time reading this Twitter thread, and from that had a lot of people who are in the medical system, and they're like, yeah, any patient who comes in, we routinely test them now. And if they test positive for COVID, they become a COVID patient, even if they came in for cancer or a heart attack or anything else. They become a COVID patient and they get reported in the COVID statistics, and we're testing everybody now. So of course but we're not actually seeing more real COVID patients with classic COVID symptoms. So these people think, this entire spike is an illusion. But then I also heard from another person who's like, I work in a hospital and my hospital is, getting filled up quickly. And then other people are saying, no, my hospital's empty. So I have no idea what's going on. And it's so hard to tell in this time of narrative warfare where people construct narratives that fit their beliefs and selectively use certain facts and not others. And I mean, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
There's so many directions that I want to go with you right now, but the confusion that you're talking about and you're talking to holding, as part of really the work you do and what you ask the world to do, we're in this opportunity of being asked to hold all the unknowns because there are so many. And you brought up that everything, when it comes to this anxiety, I don't know if I'm going to word this right, or what I'm perceiving or what's coming up for me in it is that when we get into the mode of anxiety, which is the mode of fear of unknowing what the future is going to hold for us, right? If you take that all the way down to its root, it leads us down to death, this fear, this underlying fear of annihilation, like you're saying. And a part of that came up for me yesterday. My husband sometimes is my, oracle, as I think our spouses tend to become if we allow them to. And I said something about being really in fear of all this unknowing and having this underlying anxiety and the way that it's affecting my hormones and all these things that are happening for me. And he said something about fear being the thing that we're always trying to banish. We're always trying to get rid of the fear. But the reality is that, if we're on our hero's journey, or if we consider ourselves brave, which is, I think, under all of it, what we want to be considered when it's in the face of fear, bravery only happens because there is fear. And bravery is the thing that really, if we can hold on to being brave, then it's not about banishing fear anymore. It's about being brave and being able to, be resilient and recover and show up again against your fear. He's a surfer, so he has fear out in the water when there's big waves, or, there's all kinds of fears out in the middle of the ocean. But mostly for him, it's when he's underwater and locked down by a wave, and he's trying to keep his heart rate low so he doesn't use up his oxygen before he can get back up to the surface. And that struggle that happens there is the brave part, right? The part where you're sitting there and he said he used to try to figure out how to get fear out of his body. Like, I don't want to experience fear anymore, so I'm going to do all these techniques and tools to try to remove it from my body. But then later realized that it's not about removing the fear. It's about focusing on how to be consistently brave and show up again and again. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about the holding of the two concepts, or the confusion that this is all bringing, is like, how do we sit with this until it becomes clearer for us?
Yeah. So this is, one of the things that's going on definitely is a discomfort with uncertainty, and people therefore rushing to what's most familiar and most orthodox, which is what the doctor tells you, or what the authorities tell you that the doctor tells you, what the collective of medicine tells you. Because actually there's a lot of dissenting doctors right now who, many of them are afraid to speak out, but they speak out privately, to me and other people who are in these conversations. But yeah, there's like certainty, comfort, security, predictability, it's like a refuge. As for fear, the way I see it, like, fear is an important, natural, and valid emotion that has its purpose. And its purpose is to heighten our awareness in the presence of danger, so that we don't succumb to those dangers. It provides like a shell of safety around us. Actually, fear keeps us safe. The thing is, as we grow and develop as a human soul, at some point we outgrow the shell that those particular fears provided for us. So like for a surfer, maybe when he's a beginner, he doesn't want to really go challenge those gigantic waves, or go to like a more dangerous beach or something like that. Or if, say, you're, socially awkward, speaking from experience here, like, maybe you just don't want to go in any public situation where there's, groups of people with drinks who might, exclude you. So like you have a fear that protects you from harm. But at some point you grow out of those fears, and the things then at that moment, the fears that have become limiting, you actually crave to face those fears. You actually seek out opportunities to face those fears, because we are life, and we have an imperative within us to grow and to develop into our full potential, into our full beingness. And ultimately that means confronting every fear that we have as it becomes no longer useful, no longer in service. Because like your skill as a surfer grows, and that fear now is holding you back. It was necessary. It kept you safe. You could never have survived if you hadn't listened to that fear. Fear is not a bad thing. So, but it is a signal of a bigger world out there. And at some point in the journey, it comes time to probe that larger world. So I think on a societal level right now, we are ready to face, or at least I would like to speak this into reality, that we are ready to face our fears and to probe beyond them, and to see who we can become when we're no longer scurrying around in denial of death with this mania for hygiene and safety first, risk minimization, where it becomes confining. And we're like, even if it raises the death rate by X%, which is very debatable, but even if it does, I'm willing to accept that in order to live a full life. And I'm not just speaking for young, healthy people here. Like, I have parents who are, if they get COVID, they're going to die. Like, this is not like me being selfish. It's about what values do we hold sacred as a society?
Right.
Certainly life prolongation is a value. It's an important value. Like, my mother has been quite ill for a couple of years, and we thought she was going to die a couple of years ago, but she held on, outlived her terminal diagnosis, and she's had beautiful, precious moments during that time. Like, we're all grateful that she has those extra 2 years. So this is a value. But if it came at the price of never seeing her grandchildren ever again, or dying alone, or like staying indoors all the time, would it be worth it?
Right.
And, we don't have to theorize. We can ask her,
Yeah.
and I have. And so there's no simple answer to this. It's not safety first or freedom first or embodied gatherings first, or like there's no trump card, there's no overriding value. But we have to understand like there are competing values. There are shades of gray. It's complicated, and not default into some simplifying principle that determines what our choices should be.
Yeah. And it's like when we say, well, it's whatever is right for the individual, then we're becoming separate again, because it's also you need to consider what's right for the whole. And you mentioned this concept of the dying off of the Amazon, and it being something that, when we look at it, we go, well, that's probably not going to be good and beneficial in many ways. But then I also think about the fact that I don't want to call it a fact, the idea that we are these people who hold where do I want to go with this? If we are nature, right? Because we are human, we were born here on the planet, we are part of this, and we are interbeing, we are interacting with all the things around us. We are born of it. I guess then that asks us to hold the fact that as we progress, quote unquote, as we change the world around us, and holding the idea that we are nature at the same time, then when we are doing the destroying of the Amazon, or we are doing the, affecting the climate in some way, we are essentially doing as nature. I mean, we are doing it as nature to some degree. So I feel like we become separate when we say, well, we need to stop what we're doing and reassess, the damage that it's doing to some degree, because it's confusing, because it's like, well, if we are nature, then what we're doing on this planet is just part of what our species does, but we have a bit of consciousness. So it's also like, well, we have the decision to make, because we're able to perceive having a decision, or having a choice rather.
Yeah, it gets confusing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There seems to be a paradox there. If like everything we do is natural, then how can we talk about going back to nature or respecting nature without setting it up as an other, which is actually the root of the problem to begin with? Yeah. So for me, it's a question of the problem is not that we're separate from nature. It's that we think we're separate from nature. If we understand that we are part of nature and we understand what nature actually is, like that's another aspect of it. If the modern conception of nature is not as a holy being, not as an intelligent, conscious world or universe, cosmos, but as basically a random melee of force and mass, of generic particles bouncing around randomly, So as long as we have that understanding, our participation in nature is going to not be in service to the unfolding and development of life. I like to say that the story that we hold about the world is an invitation for the world to become that story. Same thing as with a person. The story that we hold about other people invites them to be that. So you're a horrible person, you're greedy, everybody's out for themselves. Pretty soon you discover that that's true. And holding that people are generous actually gets at one of your other questions, then they become generous. You're a walking invitation for that. And so the way that we hold the world invites the world to be that. Anyway, I think that our civilization, our species as civilized humanity is simply not yet mature. We're in still the child phase of development, where the relation to the mother is one of taking, receiving, you could say. And the Mother Earth, has very generously given to us everything that we've needed, not only to survive, but also to grow a civilization, to grow technology and science and all of the ways of creating that we have access to now. Then the child is supposed to go through adolescence and transition into adulthood, where your relationship to the beloved, let's call it, not the mother, there's a new kind of love relationship that enters the scene at this time, where you no longer are simply in the role of taking, receiving, but you're also in the role of giving and of co-creating, participating in an entity bigger than yourself, maybe called a partnership. That's where it heads. That's where the first bloom of romantic love carries us into partnership. So our destiny as a civilization is to enter that kind of partnership, or another word for it is participation, coming from the same root, partner, participation in the evolution and flourishing of life. That's why any species is created. It's because there's an ecological need for it to maintain or develop the ecosystem as a whole. And we look at the history of life on Earth for billions of years, it has become more and more and more complex, from the first multicellular organisms, to flowering plants, to like at every stage, the complexity and biodiversity has grown with maybe a few, bottlenecks and hiccups. But overall, life on Earth is much more complex than it was 2 billion years ago or even 500 million years ago. So we as a species were created for that reason too. We're not Gaia's mistake. We are here for the same reason that all life is here. We have a unique gift to offer life, to offer evolution. And as we grow up, we yearn to enact that sacred duty, that gift that we have as individuals too. Like if more and more, if you do something with your life energy in the form of your career, for example, that is not in service to life, it's probably going to feel kind of empty. And so this is to actually rejoin nature really means to accept our purpose as being here to serve life.
So I'm hearing it's sorry, Jade, it's just to repeat back what I'm hearing out of that and to confirm that I get it right, because I want to really understand this. It's a way to understand it is that we are coming into hopefully an age where we can create the synergy needed to be able to hold more. So almost creating the void for a new species to be born in the instance you're giving us, or for more consciousness to be born from, or to progress in some way.
Yeah, that's what wants to happen. I'm not going to say that it's an inevitability, but we have the opportunity now. It's a coming of age ordeal, actually, that we're in. There's no guarantee that we make it through the ordeal. But I think it's really helpful to have another story of why we're here, to replace the story of ascent, the story that we are here to become the lords and possessors of nature.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't inspire us very much, does it? Onward and upward, the conquest of this, the conquest of that, the conquest of space, the conquest of the atom. I mean, come on, hasn't there been enough conquest?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're changing. The desire is changing for many of us. Jade, I didn't know if you're going to move us on, or you're going to stay in.
I think we should, yeah.
Okay.
We still have a good handful of questions.
Okay, go for it. I was going to ask something, but it'll be a spinoff I'll save till the end if we have time.
Okay. So I wanted to go back to interbeingness and how that is part of what we're waking up to with the whole Black Lives Matter movement, that racism is, still very much present, and that we are one and equal with all colors. A lot of people are waking up to that hasn't been the case for a lot, but we're still doing the bad guy and good guy narrative when we do things like cancel culture and, doing the whole Karen name calling and things like that. So do you think that in the midst of this Black Lives Matter movement, which we're all for, that we're getting further from or closer to the unity and the thought of we are one?
Yeah. So I think that the basic energy underneath Black Lives Matter is this like authentic indignation and desire for justice and desire for healing, that basically says we cannot tolerate the way things are today. We cannot tolerate the condition of Black and brown people on this earth. And then, like so much else, this basic energy of justice gets hijacked and diverted onto formulas, strategies, narratives that actually undercut its effectiveness to generate change. So one of those is to blame our current structural racism on the individual racism of white people. And so you get all this calling out, you get the toppling of statues because those are white people who also were complicit in slavery or complicit in racism. And, you do all the diversity trainings and you interrogate your privilege and so forth. But does any of that actually change the structural conditions of racism? Actually, our current system could continue perpetuating racial inequality, even with no actual racists. Even if nobody has racist attitudes, the legacy of trauma going back many generations among the descendants of slaves, the economic institutionalized poverty that's not going to go away just because you get on your knees and apologize to a Black person. So even worse than that, the whole trend toward, apology and tearing down statues and policing your language and so forth, it makes it seem like you're doing something about it, but it actually diverts attention from these structural issues. If we really wanted to improve the condition of the Black and brown people of this world, by far the biggest thing that we could do would be to cancel third world debt, because that is what keeps countries all over the world, especially in Africa, South America, the poorer parts of Asia, that's what keeps them constantly exporting their wealth in order to maintain their debt payments, to generate the foreign exchange that can be used to pay the interest on these tens of billions of dollars of debt that then leave the country's population fighting for the scraps that are left over when everything's been exported to multinational corporations and institutional investors. And this gets really nerdy, nuts and bolts economic stuff. And so this is what immiserates and impoverishes hundreds of millions of people on Earth.
And enslaves. So we're back in the
virtually slaves. I mean, you're exporting. You don't get to enjoy the fruits of your labors. It goes to the masters of finance in this case.
And all those people that are enslaved are living in a fight or flight state with no ability, no gap to be able to have perception of change.
And even many of the consequences of this global debt system are very close to what the antebellum South did with their slaves, like breaking up families, for example. Like families are getting broke, communities, cultures are getting destroyed all over the place. So this issue is just not even on where are the people protesting in the streets saying this must stop? It's not even on the radar screen. Domestically, as far as this goes, probably the best thing, the biggest thing we could do would be to end the prison industrial system and implement some kind of universal basic income or debt cancellation domestically on an individual level. And this gets, into a lot of wonky stuff, but to change the system that racism was actually invented to justify, in part invented to justify slavery. It wasn't the cause of slavery. It was the justification for slavery. Because after the Roman Empire collapsed, and by the way, this isn't the only narrative, but it's a fairly compelling one. After the Roman Empire collapsed, in Europe, slavery was forbidden. There was serfs, but then the serfs were freed too, and there was no slavery in Europe, and it was considered morally repugnant. And then the economic motivation for slavery arose again with the colonization of North America. So racism was used as a justification. Oh, it's okay because these aren't really people; these are less than human. So the economic, and you could even extend that to say that in a system of capitalism that requires deep inequality, racism is a key enabler of that system. It gives you a reason to accept unequal conditions. But the goal of anti-racism, the goal of Black Lives Matter, ultimately, and this goes back to Martin Luther King and his broader political consciousness, it is not to merely give people of color an equal slice of a pie whose ingredients require the impoverishment of people and places somewhere. It's not that Black people now get to drive the world-destroying machine too. It's not that the tables are turned and the submissive ones become dominant and they get their turn. No, how about a society where we don't have this kind of inequality and exploitation anymore that requires either racism or some other way to dehumanize people? So I'm sorry, I'm going on a long time here, but
no.
Unless we get to these deeper things like dehumanization, like the equation of justice with punishment, that's another thing. Do you want to punish those who have done these bad things, or do you actually want healing? Do you actually want racism to end?
Right. Are you a humanitarian, or are you dealing with just the racist binary concept?
Right.
And it's you say we seek our medicine according to the configuration of that wound. So it's you see their anger and you empathize with them, but the expression of inner being in this case, like you said before, also is I would do as you do if I were you. So I feel like when I look at a Black person, I would do as you were doing if I were you, I see that side. And when I look at white supremacy, I don't relate on that side. And so it's hard, I feel like, to have the we are one mentality with the racist point of view, you know?
Yeah, see, people tend to dehumanize,
Right.
white nationalists
Right.
and think, well, I could understand if I were born into a legacy of poverty and trauma in a ghetto where my only role models were drug dealers, or my only valid career path was the illegal drug trade.
Right.
Yeah, I could see myself becoming a criminal. Yeah, I can understand that. But I could never understand how I could become a white nationalist with that disgusting pot belly, with the beer resting on top of it, because I'm so privileged and entitled. I would never do that. And anytime
that
same
influence, yeah.
It's the same. Like, that's called dehumanization. It says, if I were you, I wouldn't be like that. I'm made of better stuff.
Right.
That is the basic psychic template of racism. And as long as we inhabit that, we will create more of the energy for racism on this earth. And we don't see, the thing is, if it were true that people become white nationalists or white supremacists because they're bad, that again gives us an easy solution. Right. Just like stamp out the virus.
Yeah, cut them out.
Cut them out.
Mentality.
Call them out, shut them up. And so forth.
And this isn't for them to become more conscious or anything. It's just slice it off.
It doesn't change the conditions that generate them.
Right. And it's actually, and I think it's actually repeating the conditions that generated them in the first place, because the same hatred that you may be witnessing them put onto another race, for instance, is the same energy that you're coming from when you say, well, you don't deserve to be a part of this, then, cut you out, or
right. Or just imagine, like, here you are. I see this, I feel a little hesitant to even say these things because, Charles is making excuses for, racism or something like that. But this is actually about, like, what do we actually have to do to end racism? Not what satisfies our craving to punish those that we identify as the perpetrators.
Right.
But what actually changes these conditions? Imagine yourself as being called a white supremacist and being told how horrible a person you are. And you're like, well, actually, I just helped my neighbor, my elderly neighbor mow her lawn, and I'm a nice person, and I'm a good person. I'm not a horrible person. Like, the people who are calling you horrible things, they seem ridiculous.
Right.
And so there's no possibility then of hearing their point of view. And this is one of the things I think is necessary for our society to heal its racism, is for the stories to be heard.
Yes.
Like, I sometimes
seek to understand.
Yeah. Like I visit right-wing websites sometimes, and they have like the most, what I believe is the most like distorted views of immigrants and why they're coming, and they have like this, they conjure these images of these gangs of criminals and so forth. And I'm like, wow, if you ever could just have a conversation with, that immigrant mother risking her life to come here with her children for a totally unknown future because she's escaping death squads in Guatemala or something like that. Like, if you actually could hear these stories, then you would not hold on to those beliefs. So I ask, how do we create conditions for all the stories to be heard? Because that is what rehumanizes each other. If racism is basically dehumanization, then the healing of racism